Dennis the Menace is an American sitcom based on the Hank Ketchum comic strip of the same name and preceded The Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday evenings on CBS from October 1959 to July 1963. The series stars Jay North as Dennis Mitchell, Herbert Anderson as his father, Henry, Gloria Henry as his mother, Alice, Joseph Kearns as George Wilson, Gail Gordon as George's brother, John Wilson, Sylvia Field as George's wife, Martha Wilson, and Sarah Seeger as John's wife, Eloise Wilson. Originally sponsored by Kellogg's Cereals and Best Foods, the series was produced by D'Ariel Productions and Screen Gems. Plot summary. The show follows the lives of the Mitchell family, Henry, Alice, and their only child, Dennis, an energetic, trouble-prone, mischievous, but well-meaning boy, who often tangles first with his peace and quiet loving neighbor, George Wilson, the retired salesman, and later with George's brother John, a writer. While the series was based on the Dennis the Menace comic strip, there are differences between the two. On the sitcom and in the comics, Dennis is basically a good, well-intentioned boy who always was trying to help people, but wound up making situations worse, often at Mr. Wilson's expense. In early episodes of the first season, far more disasters happened as a result of his actions than in later episodes. The character of Dennis was slightly toned down by the 6th or 7th episode. Instead of Dennis's dog Ruff, there was a smaller Cairn Terrier named Fremont which belonged to George and Martha Wilson. He did not appear during the 4th season, when John and Eloise Wilson moved into 625 Elm Street. First season, with CBS seeking to replace the hit show it had lost when it allowed Leave It to Beaver to migrate to ABC. A pilot episode titled Dennis Goes to the Movies was filmed late in 1958. In the pilot, Dennis was younger and his speech, the tone of his voice, and character had not been as developed as in episodes later in the 1959-1960 season. In the episode, Dennis indeed causes a lot of destruction, such as burying a hose, trying to repair a leg on the kitchen table and causing the whole table to collapse, almost knocking Mr. Wilson off the ladder but causing him to ruin his shoes as he steps in a can of paint, among other things. Dennis's father and mother then announce that they're going to the movies to see a western and that Dennis would stay home with a babysitter, because none of the babysitters in the neighborhood would help out because of Dennis's mischief. The Mitchells find an older lady, Mrs. Porter, who had never met Dennis. Dennis then switches places with Joey and sneaks out to the very same movie his parents are seeing. Joey stays home, while Mrs. Porter thinks he is Dennis. Meanwhile, Dennis causes havoc at the theater, even demanding that the projectionist to repeat a scene. His parents suspect that Dennis is there causing these problems and call Mrs. Porter at the house. Mrs. Porter assures them that Dennis has been well behaved. Dennis beats his parents home and is in bed by the time they return, but he makes noises trying to borrow Mr. Wilson's ladder to climb back into his upstairs bedroom window. This causes Mr. Wilson to go outside to see what is wrong. Mr. Wilson is arrested for armed robbery when he is found with Dennis's toy gun. The final scene where Joey jumps into bed with Dennis was filmed in the summer of 1959 in order to make the episode fit the half-hour time segment. In early 1959, several other episodes were filmed including The Fishing Trip, Dennis Gets a Duck, Dennis Runs Away, The Cowboy, Open House, and Dennis Becomes a Babysitter. At that point, CBS consented to tape the program to run at 7:30 p.m. EDT on Sunday evenings after Lassie. After viewing these episodes, CBS determined that Dennis's antics had to be toned down because of fear that his actions would encourage children watching the show to imitate Dennis. Several weeks before the series was to debut, the episode The Signpost was made, in which Tommy made his debut. Margaret, who appeared in 2 episodes that were made before but aired after, also appeared along with Joey. After the pilot aired as the first episode, The Signpost aired, and after that, Fishing Trip, the second episode, aired. After that, newly made episodes aired mixed in with the initial batch made earlier in 1959, which explains why Dennis runs away, which was the fourth or fifth episode, was run later in the first runs, and shows an obviously younger Dennis as in the earlier episodes. Joey was gradually phased out in Season 1. Dennis's friend Stuart appeared in only a few episodes in the first season and was played by Ron Howard. Later seasons, Dennis and Mr. Wilson had a love-hate relationship, with Dennis always aggravating Mr. Wilson, but usually without realizing it. He would call Mr. Wilson his best friend, and often refer to him as good ol' Mr. Wilson, while on many occasions Mr. Wilson would tell Dennis, "You have far better friends than me." Mrs. Wilson, however, loved Dennis in a grandmotherly way and tried to make the situation better between the two. Other neighbors and townspeople aired on a recurring basis included Mrs. Lucy Elkins, Mrs. Dorothy Holland, Miss Esther Cathcart, Mr. Otis Quigley, Opie Swanson, Mr. Lawrence Finch, Sergeant Harold Mooney, Mr. Crinky and Buzz, among others. Dennis also had a nemesis named Johnny Brady, whose father and Henry Mitchell also were sometimes at odds. Second and third season episodes began to focus on Dennis at school learning to read, going to camp, playing baseball, being in scouting, and trying to help Mr. Wilson. Dennis was gradually maturing, and at times it is revealed that Mr. Wilson does like Dennis deep down. In the fourth season, Dennis is no longer seen in his trademark overalls and is instead wearing regular pants. Also, the famous striped shirt goes from a crew neck to a polo-type shirt with a collar and buttons. Death of Joseph Kearns on February 17, 1962. After filming the show's 100th episode, Joseph Kearns died of a cerebral hemorrhage. In a 2010 interview, actress Gloria Henry revealed Kearns followed a strict 6-week metrical diet that may have contributed to his death. The following 2 episodes were filmed without the character of Mr. Wilson. Gail Gordon joined the cast for the last 6 episodes of the season as Mr. Wilson's brother, John. Gordon bore a closer resemblance to the comic strips Mr. Wilson than Kearns did. It was explained that John was staying as a guest while George was settling an estate back east. Sylvia Field, who played Martha Wilson, was let go at the end of the season. He was joined by his wife, Eloise, played by Sarah Seeger. Final references to George and Martha Wilson were made early in the 4th season, although they were not mentioned by name after the first episode. George Wilson was referred to as the other Mr. Wilson in the 2nd episode, and John Wilson says he bought the house from his brother in the 7th episode. After that, the original Wilsons were never mentioned again. Cast: main characters Dennis Mitchell, series protagonist Henry Mitchell, father to Dennis and Alice's husband, Alice Mitchell, Henry Mitchell's wife and Dennis's mother. Mr. George Wilson, the Mitchells' neighbor, often exasperated with Dennis's antics, though is proud that Dennis considers him his best friend. George has a dog named Fremont. Kearns appeared in 101 episodes from 1959 to 1962. His last work was aired posthumously in the episode The Man Next Door on May 6, 1962. Mrs. Martha Wilson, George Wilson's wife, a loving, grandmotherly-type neighbor who enjoys Dennis's company. The Wilsons had no children. Martha Wilson was written out of the series after Joseph Kearns' death. Tommy Anderson, Dennis's closest friend. Mr. John Wilson, George Wilson's brother. Gordon's first episode is entitled John Wilson's Cushion, which aired on May 27, 1962. Gordon appeared in 43 episodes from 1962 to 1963. Eloise Wilson, John Wilson's wife. Recurring characters Margaret Wade, a snooty, but good girl with a crush on Dennis. Seymour Williams, Dennis's friend. Stuart, another of Dennis's friends. Howard left to join the cast of The Andy Griffith Show. The Bradys. Johnny was Dennis's nemesis, the neighborhood braggart with a better-than-you attitude, shown to everyone but his father Charles, who annoys adults with the same arrogance. Johnny was played by Gregory Irvin. Lawrence Haddon was cast as Charles Brady. Sergeant Harold Mooney, policeman. Mooney's first name also was Ralph in various episodes. Mrs. Lucy Elkins, a Mitchell neighbor. Mr. Otis Quigley, grocer. Miss Esther Cathcart, spinster. Mr. Crinky, newspaper editor. Grandma Mitchell, Henry's mother, who joined the cast for 8 episodes in 1961 while Gloria Henry was on maternity leave. Joey McDonald, Dennis's friend. Mrs. Schooner, local socialite, volunteer and outdoor enthusiast. Mr. Lawrence Finch, drugstore owner. Mrs. Dorothy Holland, a Mitchell neighbor, and Mrs. Elkins, a friend. Klebe appeared in 5 episodes from 1959 to 1962, 3 as Mrs. Holland. Mr. Merivale, florist. Uncle Ned Matthews, George and John Wilson's uncle. R.P. Swanson, electrician. Mr. Dorfman, postman. Mr. Hall, Mr. Mitchell's boss. Foster A. Stewart, chief of police. Buzz, the salvage man. Guest stars Mel Blanc, a Hollywood voice-acting specialist, was cast as Leo Trinkle, the town dog catcher. In the 1961 episode, Miss Cathcart's friend, Spring Byington, appeared as herself in the 1961 episode, Dennis's Birthday, with Vaughn Taylor also appearing in this segment. Eleanor Donahue portrayed Georgiana Ballinger in the 1960 episode, Dennis and the Wedding. In the storyline, Georgiana is the niece of George and Martha Wilson, and Dennis is selected as the ring bearer at her wedding. The cranky Mr. Wilson worries that Dennis could disrupt the whole ceremony. Has left. Georgiana was referenced later in the second season as being pregnant with her first child, but her character was not seen or ever mentioned again for the rest of the series. Bob Dornan was cast as Lieutenant Walden in the 1962 episode, Dennis at Boot Camp. Roy Roberts played Captain Stone in the same segment. Bob Hastings appeared 5 times on the series, most notably as Coach Gilmore in the 1963 episode, The Big Basketball Game. Cheryl Holdridge, a member of the Mickey Mouse Club, was cast as Helen Franklin in Dennis's Lovesick Friend, the second episode without Joseph Kearns as Mr. Wilson. Instead, this segment features Edward Everett Horton as Uncle Ned Wilson. Sandy Koufax, Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher, appeared as himself in the episode Dennis and the Dodger, the first episode without Joseph Kearns. John A. Shorty Powers, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force known as the voice of the astronauts, portrayed himself in the 1963 episode Junior Astronaut. Others appearing on the series include episodes, ratings, cancellation. By the show's 4th season, Jay North was 11 years old and was outgrowing the antics associated with his character. CBS cancelled Dennis the Menace in the spring of 1963. Syndication. In 1961, NBC began airing reruns of the series in daytime. The show continued in reruns on NBC on Saturday mornings from 1963 to 1965, and the show was syndicated in that same year. It has run consistently on local stations over subsequent years. On July 1, 1985, the Nickelodeon cable network began airing the series, and continued until October 21, 1994. It also aired on TV Land from 2002 to 2003. On January 3, 2011, Dennis the Menace began airing on Antenna TV. The show was exported to the United Kingdom and shown on the ITV network, with 103 episodes airing in the London region between 1960 and 1966. To avoid confusion with the British comic character, the series was known in the UK as just Dennis. DVD releases. Shout! Factory has released all 4 seasons on DVD in Region 1. On August 7, 2012, Shout! Factory released a 20-episode best-of set entitled Dennis the Menace 20 Timeless Episodes.